Hey, what's up, guys? It's me, ThrashManiac99, here to welcome you back to Thrash Reviews, where I review upcoming hard rock and heavy metal albums in the calendar year of 2016. And today, this is an interesting one. This is the newest release from grindcore band, I believe from Sweden, called Gadget. Their new album, The Great Destroyer. And you know how I love my grindcore, being fast, out of control, deep growling vocals with some black metal screams thrown into the mix, and the lyrics about pretty much anything you want it to be. So for this album review, just like I did with the Venomous Concept album, because of the fact how grindcore always has a lot of songs, I can't really necessarily talk about every single one of them. So what I'm going to be doing is kind of describing the album, as well as a couple of tracks that I thought were excellent in their own right. As far as a couple of tracks that were very excellent would be songs such as Pillars of Filth, From Graduation to Devastation, Dedication. Those were the three tracks, in my personal opinion, that really shaped this album and absolutely had a lot of influence from the past grindcore bands from back in the mid to late 1980s, 1990s, bands such as Napalm Death, Terrorizer, Brutal Truth, Nazem, even Pig Destroyer can easily be thrown into the mix as far as an influence would go for Gadget. But and the lyrics, all political or about social issues, all around the board. After all, that is what grindcore is essentially all about for the most part. Lyrically, is all about stuff involving the dark side of life, as well as political interests, things wrong with the world, social issues, songs about the environment, or if you want to go in the more brutal route, when you get to like the death/gore grind bands, where they just talk about brutality within, like, you know, medical interest, or horror movie-esque, which to me, gore grind and death grind more or less are just death metal with some grind influence, and that's just the way I see those subgenres being. But this right here is traditional grindcore, at its heaviest from Sweden. And Gadget, they're a band that has only been around for a little while, as far as I know, and these guys are relatively new to me, but that's not really saying much. But with Gadget, like on tracks even such as the last track, I Don't Need You Dead and Gone, which was a 5.5-minute track, it kind of diversified a little bit as far as speed. Like, you had some of the blast beat moments, but then you would have, even on other tracks, you would have a bit of like a doom metal tempo shift going on, where there's all these slow-paced, like, kind of Black Sabbath or even Candlemass influenced guitar riffs, and they were well executed for a fast band. So it's because certain bands, when they combine slow and fast songs in grindcore, that's what makes the bands really great, in my opinion. Like Napalm Death, even though they were mostly fast, whenever they would do tempo shifts, it was really cool. Listen to albums such as From Enslavement to Obliteration, or Harmony Corruption, Fear, Emptiness, Despair, albums back in the late 80s, early 90s, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. But how Gadget performs the grindcore style is very much similar to what Napalm Death did on Scum, and as well as combining a little bit of influence from, of course, bands such as Brutal Truth, as I mentioned before, kind of taking those influences but make it into their own style. And, of course, the Napalm Death influence is apparent because Barney from Napalm actually makes an appearance on this album, and it was really, really cool. So, with that being said, overall with this album, the flow was pretty cool. Like, you had certain tracks that kind of were connected to each other, and then you had some tracks that would end just by itself and then go into the next song. However, as far as the consistency goes, like, the first half of the album, in my opinion, was where it was really strong. In the second half, it kind of lost the plot a little bit, it slipped in quality, but the songs that weren't the best were still not bad. But it's just, the big issue I found with this album was the consistency. It wasn't quite consistent in the second half. The first half is awesome. The second half kind of slipped. So for that reason, the score for this album, I'm going to give this one an 81 out of 100. Still a very solid release for a grind band, so there you have it. So 81 out of 100 for The Great Destroyer by Gadget. What did you guys think of this album? Any fans of Gadget out there? Let me know what did you think of this album in the comments down below. But until next review, which will be later in the week because, oh my lord, the 25th of this month is going to be packed this Friday because we're going to have new releases from Amon Amarth, which is the big album I'm looking forward to, Asking Alexandria, just to see if they've actually gotten better. I'm not holding my breath on that. Walls of Jericho, Caliban, Joe Bonamassa, a blues rock player. It's going to be interesting to hear that. Artillery, Ragnarok, and Metal Church. Can't escape Metal Church Friday, so yeah, this Friday is going to be a big day for listening to albums. I'm probably not going to get to all of them in a day, probably a couple of them, and then over the next week, I'll try to get to the certain ones that I need to get to. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Peace.